All right, welcome back to 1863. We're just going to touch on the two important military victories while looking at slides from my vacation. All right, let me get the share screen going. Share screen. All right. In late June 1863, Lee invaded Pennsylvania. See Lee's route through Virginia, through what is now West Virginia, up into Pennsylvania. Now, this was done for same reasons the invasion of Maryland. Gained recognition from Britain and France. Right, we talked about that. And it's doubtful Lee was going for Gettysburg. I'm not really sure where he was actually headed. I've heard some people think he was headed for Pittsburgh, with its large manufacturing base. If others have said Philadelphia, just sort of the birthplace of the United States. That certainly would have been a coup to capture the birthplace of the United States. But wherever he was going, he never got there because he's going to land here at Gettysburg. You can see sort of everything moving. And there are some offshoots. There's one attack here in Washington, D.C. before moving up this direction, but bulk of it here. Union General George Meade, and of course Lee himself. This is the Pennsylvania militia being called out by the governor of Pennsylvania. This is orders from the Union Army to stop selling liquor in Gettysburg for the duration of the occupation. Now, Gettysburg is 3 days of battle. Okay? The first day of Gettysburg is July 1st, July 1, 1963. Happens really north of the town, up in this area. Basically, two advanced groups kind of slammed into each other. Probably no more than 30,000 troops, if that. The bulk of the rest of Gettysburg is going to be down here, but it starts up here. They sort of slam into each other. And you can see this would have been out in the fields. This monument is where Lee would have been during that first day battle. This is from the monument, so this is what Lee would have seen. And this would have been filled with troops fighting, Union and Confederate troops. And then eventually Union troops would have retreated back in this direction towards the town. Now, there's something to beware here, and that is these mountains over here, which Lee should have gotten his hands on the first day, but he didn't. Right. Overnight, the armies marched in, so by July 2nd, you can see the Confederate Army having the actual town of Gettysburg and then running down Seminary Ridge. Okay, the first day of fighting would have been up here, and then the Union sort of having a much tighter hook shape, but the Union also having these two mountains down here, Little Round Top and Big Round Top, plus the hills over here. So the second day of Gettysburg, July 2nd, is largely going to be fought by Confederates trying to get up to the high ground, the Big Round Top and Little Round Top. because if the Confederates can get up to the high ground, they can use their artillery to blast away at the center of the Union position. All right, so most of that fighting will take place on the second day. You can see here the second day of fighting, a lot of it happening up here around Culp's Hill Cemetery Hill, and then Confederate forces moving through the Peach Orchard and the Devil's Den across the Round Tops. Now, one Union general made a terrible mistake that day. Union General Dan Sickles thought that he would move his troops forward off the ridge. Union troops had sort of been here along Cemetery Ridge. Sickles moved his troops out to what is called the Peach Orchard. And he did that for the high ground. The Peach Orchard, looking at it today, I don't see any high ground, but there was some high ground here. And so Sickles moved his troops out here. And what that meant is that his troops, one, are far away from any type of reinforcements because they left the rest of the army behind them, but they're also vulnerable to being attacked from multiple points, which you can see happening here, being attacked along this road and then along Wheatfield Road, which is what this is, Wheatfield Road right here. Sickles should have been court-martialed, but he wasn't. I think people felt sorry for him because he lost one of his legs below the knee. Was hit by a cannonball. But a lot of fighting out here in the wheat field, a lot of fighting here in the in the Peach Orchard as well. As that fighting continued, Confederate troops started moving further and further down and towards the Round Top. Now, this is the Little Round Top. This is what the Confederates would have been running up in July while wearing a wool uniform. Okay. I walked up that damn thing and it about damn near did me in. And I was 10 years younger than I am now. If you're watching this in 2025. And then Union forces would have been behind these walls. And that would have been the 20th Maine, who largely defended this section of the Little Round Top. Meanwhile, in front of Little Round Top, the wheat field is back here behind these trees. This over here is called the Devil's Den, the rocks. This is the slaughter pen. And this out here in front is the Valley of Death. A lot of inventive names, they come up for this stuff. So that's a somewhat better look at the Devil's Den. Those rocks are about 15 to 20 feet in height. You can sort of crawl around on them. There would have been fighting all along in here, the smoke, the noise, the battle. This is the slaughter pen out here in front. This is if you're standing in the slaughter pen looking back up at Little Round Top. You can see Union forces where these monuments are. And then this is looking up Little Round Top from the Valley of Death, as it came to be called. Lee got close. He got really close on the second. Again, his Confederate troops coming up the Round Top, and you can see where they were stopped largely by the 20th Maine right here. That's where these guys would have been. So Lee had come really close on the second day to getting the round tops, that he had been stopped by Union forces. Here's the Devil's Den, the Valley of Death, slaughter pen. On day 3, July 3rd, Lee decided to send his men across the middle, George Pickett's. This is called Pickett's Charge. And it's right here along the center. Here's the peach orchard down here from day 2. So you're right here along the center. You can, if you visit Gettysburg, go across Pickett's Charge. It's about 1.25 miles. So this would have been standing where Lee's forces were standing, okay, on that July 3rd. And then those are the round tops from the day before. Those would have been to your right if you were in Lee's army. And then this is looking back where Lee's troops would have been. This is marching out into Pickett's Charge. You turned around, look behind you. Again, here are the round tops off to your right. And here's where about you would have been when Union forces opened fire with their artillery and their massed gunfire. So round shot, grape shot, shell shot, all that stuff I talked about in the artillery section. This is where it would have opened up at. Confederates did manage to reach this spot. This is sometimes called the high water mark of the Confederacy. It's right here. This is where they got to. And from that spot, this is looking back over Pickett's Charge. And you would have started way back over there. 13,000 Confederates went out on Pickett's Charge. Less than half of them came back. Again, it was a huge mistake on Lee's part. He actually offered to resign, but Jefferson Davis would not allow him to resign. July 4th, Lee began his retreat from Gettysburg. Now that is going to be the last invasion of the Union. Lee's army will never invade the Union. It will never be as strong or as well equipped as it was. That July 4th, the very same July 4th, is the 4th where Vicksburg finally falls. And thus, the Mississippi falls to the Union. You recall that the Anaconda Plan had said that the Mississippi River should be conquered by the Union. Well, by 1863, everything north of Vicksburg had been conquered, and everything south of Vicksburg had been conquered. So Vicksburg was the last Confederate city on the Mississippi River, and Grant had been given the task of conquering it. And eventually Grant had gone down the Mississippi, crossed, hammered everyone in his way, and then settled in for a siege at Vicksburg. The siege of Vicksburg about 54 days, ending on July 4. But many people moving into the caves surrounding Vicksburg to get away from the artillery bombardment. If you visit Vicksburg, it's not as compact as Gettysburg. Remember, Vicksburg is a campaign. Gettysburg as a battle. So they haven't really restored much. This would have been the Confederate fort up here. He would have been charging at it. Union men charging. There would have been a Confederate fort here. The walls would have been about 10 to 12 feet high, with Confederates shooting down into the valley where these Union men were at. Another Confederate fort would have been here. You and the Union would have in the face charging up this. Union coal miners did put in a tunnel here. It's been reinforced since the end of the war. This is on the Confederate side, that fort. You would have been standing up on the wall to shoot down in the valley, but this tunnel complex would have allowed, given you some cover right along here to at least, so you're not completely out in the open as you start. But Vicksburg Falls, the glorious 4th, it's a huge celebration. Lee is retreating, Vicksburg has fallen, the Mississippi has fallen. Grant, after that, will be promoted to become head of all head of all the Union armies. And we will catch up with Grant in our next video, which will cover 1864 and 1865, the last 16 or so months of the war, really just focusing on about April to the following April. All right, and I will see you there.